But before you go, we would like to see your bellies.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Colton Ogburn, and these are all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Severance Season 2, Episode 3, Who is Alive? We are going to explain the ending of this episode and discuss what's next for Mark as his two selves become one. We'll also talk about what the hell the export hall is and what these numbers on Milcheck's computer screen mean. I also want to get into how this episode gives us even more clues about the work happening at Lumen and how it is all part of their mission to resurrect the devil below, Kier. And hey, speaking of, be sure to check out our Praise Kier sticky note shirt up on the merch store right now, ScreenCrushmerch.com. So first, I want to talk about goats.
Okay, me and Helly will find the goat man.
Back in season 1, we saw Helly and Mark stumble across a room on the severed floor where we saw a man feeding baby goats and exclaiming,
"You can't take them yet, they're not ready."
And that has pretty much been on my mind ever since seeing that episode for the first time like 3 years ago. I mean, what the is going on with the goats? Are they connected to the cloning theories? Are they symbolic of like a satanic type cult like the cult of Kier? Are they connected to a sacrificial type ceremony involving goat blood to keep an elite oligarch like Kier alive? I want answers. And this episode finally took us back to that goat room, and while it didn't come even remotely close to answering all of our questions, it did reveal quite a bit. So Mark says in the office that they need to find the goat man and possible goat people. Now, the goat man is of course in reference to this guy who we saw feeding the goats, but goat people? Well, we've seen a goat person in this painting from season 1 where we saw a godlike Kier taming the four tempers. Remember, the four tempers are woe, frolic, dread, and malice. We can see these tempers on the MDR screens as well. Now, in this painting where Kier is taming the four tempers, the goat man represents malice, and on the Severance wiki, they actually refer to him as a ram. But hey, you know, they're all bovidae, so I'm just gonna call him the Goat Man. Now, we also saw the Goat Man depicted during the waffle party for Dylan back in season 1, along with the other 3 tempers that are depicted in this painting. Now, we should also mention that there has been a lot of Greek mythology imagery in this show, most recently the line about Persephone.
What's my name?
Persephone.
And how in Greek mythology, she spent half her life in the underworld just like a severed employee, since half their life down on the severed floor. So with all of these Greek mythology references, we can't talk about the goat people without mentioning Pan, the god of chaos and fertility. Pan was essentially a half man, half goat type god, and fertility would actually have a connection to the resurrection of Kier and like this little baby Kier that we saw in the new intro for this series. Now, in the book of the great god Pan by Arthur Machen, he has an evil daughter who is actually named Helen, which of course could be a direct tie to Helena. So with the goat or the ram or whatever being malice, we have to remember that malice is defined by Kier as the intention to do evil. This connection between goats and evil ties back of course to goats having a connection to satanic, imagery and rituals, which ties to the cult of Kier, and the severed floor's connection to the 9 circles of hell that we've discussed in previous breakdowns. Now, it has been widely theorized that out of the 4 refiners, Helly represents malice, which would be more accurately applied to her outie self, Helena. And look, this is a pretty surface level observation, but she does have the word hell in her name, and that all of course would connect back to the Pan, Helen, goat person stuff that we just discussed. Now, while we as the viewer may view Helena as the one committing evil, we have to remember that this is a temper defined by Kier, and the actions of Helly against Lumen could be viewed as evil or malicious in the eyes of Kier. Now, another connection to Greek mythology in the name Helen is in the Iliad, where we had the character of Helen who actually caused essentially the Trojan War. And in this season, I've said that I am fully convinced that Heliar has not returned and that this is actually Helena Egan pretending to be Heliar, and she's essentially serving as a Trojan horse, sneaking her way into the severed floor amongst the other severed employees and pretending to be an ally when in reality, she's there to up. So it was also in this episode that it became pretty clear to me that Irving also knows that something is up with Helly, and he suspects that she is not who she says she is, to which I say, duh. I don't know how Irving is the only one picking up on this. I mean, there are so many moments in this episode alone that to me, it's just clear. It's clear as day that this is the character of Helena and not Heliar. And that reminds me, can we give a hand to these actors who are essentially being tasked with playing two completely different roles and tackling the complexities of playing two different characters who are supposed to occupy the same body? I've always thought that Helly, especially portrayed by Britt Lauer, portrayed her innie and outie so differently, down to the tiny little nuances like how she carries the weight of her eyes between the two characters. Helly has like this more wide-eyed look, while Helena is more like menacing. It's so clear to me that that's Helena, but we shall see. But Irving, I think you're onto something. And you know, I guess it actually would make sense that Irving is the only one who's picking up on the fact that Helly's acting a little weird. I mean, Dylan is distracted with the temptations that Milcheck is offering him as like secret perks, and Mark is so caught up in his mission to find Miss Casey and his own infatuation with Helly from a lustful standpoint that they're both blind to the stranger that's looking right back at them. It's only Irving who is seemingly severed from his outside distractions, and because of that, he is able to see Helly for who she is, or Helena, I should say. Only Irving has reached a point of having nothing else to lose and, you know, really just wanting to burn this place to the ground. Irving is fed up, and that's allowing him to see things clearer than ever before, which is such a great parallel to his character in the first season, where he was like the biggest Kier bootlicker there was.
It's okay if you cry.
Now, another piece of evidence that Irving and myself are right about Helly is this little hint on her computer monitor back in episode 1 of this season. Her screen actually read Santa Mira, the location in which the film Invasion of the Body Snatchers takes place. Helena is a body snatcher, confirmed. Now, speaking of missed Easter eggs and praising the show's attention to detail, I should also mention how these two elevator sequences from episode 1 and 2 of this second season, they are actually perfectly synced up if you play them parallel to one another, so really nice touch. So anyway, this next scene of Helly and Mark in the hallway, having this awkward but simultaneously super sweet, silent, smiley gaze, I loved it until I remembered that this isn't Helly. And you can actually see that Mark briefly gets a whiff of something being off about Helly, but she then immediately takes advantage of the fact that he's infatuated with her and the two basically one another. Now, not only is it screwed up that Helena is essentially manipulating and taking advantage of the fact that Mark likes her, but what's even creepier is that I got the impression that her look at him might actually be genuine, like she's actually having feelings for Mark. In the previous episode, when Helena is studying her and Mark's interactions from the season 1 finale, she seems happy and like she wishes that that was her. I think that Helly might actually be getting feelings for Mark, and actually she's kind of like envious of Helliar because Helliar is such a rebel while Helena, you know, she's just following in her family footsteps and doing exactly what her father wants. So I wouldn't be surprised if Helena actually has some kind of turn and ends up helping the gang, you know, like take down Lumen and buck the system. Next, we get the return of Natalie in her classic role as the middleman for communication with the board. Now, in this scene, she's actually serving as the middleman between the board and Milcheck, mirroring this scene from season 1 when she was serving the same role as a middleman for Cobell and the board. So Natalie presents Milcheck with a gift from the board featuring himself as Kier.
Please accept from the board these inclusively recanonicalized paintings intended to help you see yourself in Kier.
Now, this once again reemphasizes the deification of Kier. Man is meant to see themselves in God and God in themselves. Judeo-Christian scripture refers to this as the image of God, and here we are seeing literal images meant to show Milcheck himself in the image of Kier, his God. And man, there is a lot of creepy behind these pictures. First off, there's just something like racial going on. I don't know how else to put it. I don't know what it is, but there's something just demeaning about changing a black man's eyes to the color blue and telling him that this is a better version of himself. This faint hint of like race-based, eugenic-based purism, it just gives these like slight hints of the evil history of Lumen and their ties to slavery and the Civil War. It's really creepy. And these weird paintings aren't the only connection to eugenics that Lumen has. The project that Mark is working on, Cold Harbor, could be tied to Cold Springs Harbor, the eugenics center for America in the 1920s and 1930s, even being labeled the eugenics capital of the world. There's also the AI of it all. I don't think any any of these paintings are actually painted in universe. Now, these may very well be painted by actual artists for the show, but in universe, I think these are totally a product of some type of like AI imaging technology that Lumen has developed. Images that are specifically designed and hung throughout Lumen to elicit certain emotional responses out of its employees, which ties directly into the emotion-based work of MDR and the Four Tempers. So back to the board, a big question anytime the board is present is who the hell are they? We've heard them speak one time in this scene from season 1.
Is the board even there?
Yes.
Now, I think the board isn't actually a board, like I don't think it's multiple people, I think it is one person, and I think that person is Kier Egan. But it's also possible that the board could consist of not only Kier, but all of the other Lumen CEOs that are supposedly dead. And I can't put a finger on it, but there's just something evil and eerie when the board is present. I mean, even in the eyes of Natalie here, we can see what I can only describe as fear behind her eyes and smile. And this was yet another scene in this episode with a long, awkward stare and smile.
Congratulations, Seth.
So back with Mark and Helly and their exploration of the goat room, we see them enter this tiny baby goat hallway that is essentially a miniature version of the severed floor hallways. And watching Mark and Helly crawl through this hallway made them look gigantic, especially after having seen them walk these same hallways so many times throughout the series. Seeing them crawl through this miniature hall brilliantly represents how the walls are closing in on Lumen and what they're hiding, and how Mark is getting closer and closer to uncovering their secrets. And his journey down this compressed hallway represents how Mark is getting closer and closer to the truth. And a step toward that truth lies behind whatever the hell is going on with the goat people. So once they get into this giant room with a grassy hill under fluorescent lights, I don't know why, but I just felt drained. It honestly reminded me of that OG Windows XP grassy field wallpaper that used to be found in every fluorescently lit office building in the world. I mean, this show is a commentary on the work-life balance and how some people feel like they are trapped in an internal purgatory when they're at their office job. They hate their job so much that they'd be willing to sever their mind not to actually have to experience the job. And I bet you there are people out there who actually associate that desktop wallpaper with negative emotions because it reminds them of their job. There's just something artificially creepy about putting these beautiful landscapes as desktop wallpapers to help distract from the fact that you are stuck in an office building, and this room with the goats is kind of a three-dimensional representation of that same feeling. And it all comes back to the word artificial. I think a lot of what Lumen is up to, whether it be with the cloning or AI or consciousness, I think they are trying to perfect some type of artificial consciousness and artificial intelligence. I think that is what this season is leading toward. So anyway, as Helly and Mark walk through these fields, we see Homeboy here wearing a black goat head. Now, this is actually a Markor, I think I'm saying that right. You can tell based on the spiral horns that that's what kind of goat it is. Now, not to get right back into all the satanic imagery stuff, but dude, a big black goat with those scary horns. I mean, have you seen The Witch? This is totally representative of the devil, and as I've said before, I think the devil of this story is Kier, and these goats could resemble that of the sacrificial lamb essentially representing a sacrifice for the greater good, and in this case, a sacrifice to Kier, and the flourishing of Lumen would be that greater good. The severed employees are literally sacrificing and serving Kier. So then we meet Captain Phasma herself, Gwendolyn Christie. You'll recognize her, of course, from other great shows like Game of Thrones and this brief scene in Star Wars Episode 8 where we could see her face through the cracked helmet. And amongst the goat people, we can also see the same guy from last season who was feeding those baby goats. Next, we jump over to optics and design where we see the return of Felicia, Bert's co-worker, and we get to see her and Irving reconnect and bond over their mutual mourning of Bert. And here in the background, when Irving walks into the O&D office, we can see what might actually be Bert's old blue lab coat hanging on this rack. We can also see this painting of who I presume is a young Kier Egan and military attire. This painting first appeared in the season 1 episode, The UUR. We also got the return of this painting from season 1, The Courtship of Kier, which we actually saw Bert and Irving admiring in the hallway back in season 1, and that's why we see Irving smiling when he looks upon this painting in this episode. Now, this painting features Kier with his wife working in an ether factory, ether being something that is used to put people to sleep for operations such as the Severance procedure. Now, I also love how in this episode we saw that Irving is an artist, just like his outie self, having drawn Bert, as well as the testing floor elevator, just like his outie would paint on the outside. And what's interesting is that his outie self has dormant memories about having seen this elevator, but innie Irving really only knows about it from his outie's paintings, which he saw in the season 1 finale. I think it's also safe to assume that Irving totally drew this picture of Miss Casey. So when Felicia sees the drawings of the elevator, she says,
"How do you know about the exports hall?"
So we know that the elevator leads down to the testing floor, but with Felicia calling it the exports hall, I'm wondering if Optics and Design has actually sent paintings and whatnot down to exports, and that would be them exporting the painting elsewhere. I think that maybe they're exporting paintings and various other things down to the testing floor so they can test whether or not these paintings and other things are eliciting the desired emotions out of their severed employees. So then we jump back over to Dylan, where we see him escorted to the security office to meet his outie's wife, as Milcheck promised. The actress playing his wife may look familiar if you're a fan of the later Walking Dead seasons. And you'll notice that Dylan's wife is wearing a blue turtleneck, just like we saw Milcheck wearing in the season premiere. This represents that she too is in a chokehold by the overbearing power of Lumen, and it represents how she too is reliant upon the income that Dylan makes working there. But this blue turtleneck also symbolizes her having an authority over innie Dylan, and how Dylan is in a way her subordinate. He does the work that earns the income that provides for their family, but he does this almost as a service to his higher-ups, those being his outie self and his outie's wife. So it's fitting that she is dressed like his higher-ups on the severed floor, Milcheck and previously Miss Cobell. And we also got this creepy line where Dylan says that he'll be good and make them proud, re-emphasizing how Dylan serves them. Now, I was personally wondering throughout this scene if this was actually his wife or just a hired actor, another deception, but we later do get confirmation that this really is his wife, and we see her and Dylan at home in the outie world. Oh, and I also wanted to mention that this photo of their family in an old Western setting, I seriously doubt this was a manipulation of Lumen to keep the outie world timeless and the innies, ignorant of the outer world. I think in all likelihood that in universe, they got this picture taken at an amusement park or something where you can dress up in costumes and take a family photo. It's a pretty common thing. Now, I do have a little theory that I wanted to throw out there. Things do not seem great between outie Dylan and his wife, and I think that we could see an affair of sorts blossom between Gretchen and innie Dylan, almost like a, conjugal visit type situation. And then that would bring in this whole debate of, is it cheating if she hooks up with innie Dylan? I mean, it's him, but it's not him, and it would just make for really interesting television, and it would make you question the morality of the situation, which is something that this show just really handles well. And any great show, one of the key themes you'll find is questioning morality of your main characters and what they do and what they don't do. So I'm thinking that that's where this whole visiting your outie's family thing is headed. Now, jumping back over to the goat room, we hear them question if MDR has pouches like a kangaroo, I guess, a reference to this scene from season 1.
It's literally silly. Like they say, you all have pouches.
Now, up in the outie world, we see Natalie at Devin and Rickon's house using her seductress-like tactics to make Rickon soften on his skepticism of Lumen, and boy does it work, on him, not on Devin. Not only is Natalie using her beautiful smile and her flirtatious skill set, a skill set that she uses as a press secretary to make people think fondly of Lumen, but she's also using Rickon's desire of being a published author. She's using it against him by offering him a book deal.
Natalie wants to discuss a version of the UUR specifically for innies.
This is yet another piece of Lumen's plan to infiltrate and control Mark's life, but also infiltrating Mark's family, like Miss Cobell did by getting close to Devin and their baby. Now, I would assume that Lumen is also likely genuinely interested in Rickon writing a book that can serve as manipulative propaganda to keep innies in line with an innie version of his book. And look, Rickon's a nice guy, but he's not a great writer, so it's probably just a manipulation tactic. Now, here on Milcheck's computer, we can see 4 listings for personnel. Now, 2983 is Helly, 1004 is Mark, but I'm actually not sure who 2160 and 1002 are. I mean, at first, I thought it'd be Irving and Dylan, but as we learned in season 1, Irving's last 4 digits are 2236, and we never actually saw Dylan's. So I'd like to hear down in the comments below, who do you think these other 2 people are? Could they be monitoring Cobell? Could it be Miss Wong, let me know what you think. Okay, so now let's get to the big climactic ending of the episode. Outie Mark finally knows that Gemma is alive.
Did he tell her your wife is alive at Lumen?
Who told you that?
Now, I think it's pretty clear that he's known this ever since he yelled, "She's alive," and was holding the picture of them in that season finale. But he's been in denial, and I get it. I'd probably be in denial too, but I do think that deep down he has known that his innie self was talking about his late wife. So when he finds out, this pushes Mark to finally agree to undergo reintegration like Petey did before him. Now, we see Mark sitting here on his bed wearing a red sweater similar to this shot of him in a red shirt in the intro for the show. I also thought it was a nice touch that they're doing the procedure down in Mark's basement, which is where Petey was hiding out in season 1 following his reintegration. And I also like how it parallels the fact that innie Mark is being awoken on a below the surface level like the severed floor. Now, the questions that he's being asked morph from outie questions into innie questions, and then they turn into Petey asking Mark S orientation questions, just like we saw Mark ask Helly on her first day.
Hey there, you on the table? I wonder if you'd mind taking a brief survey.
Mark then begins to remember him waking up on that same conference room table, just like Helly did back in season 1. Mark's brainwaves are now aligned, and Mark Scout and Mark S are now one. And guys, I am just loving this season of Severance. It's one of my favorite shows, maybe my favorite show. I'm really enjoying breaking it down and talking about it with you guys every week. I want to hear your thoughts on the episode down in the comments below, or you can at me on Twitter, you can find me on Discord. Yell out your window, I don't know, but I'd love to talk with you guys about the show. If you're new here, please do feel free to subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Colton Ogburn.